You just never know who you'll meet online. And sometimes the connections with people from different parts of the world in very different circumstances to your own, you can find that connection. And Hannah and I connected. We were both in the Start Over Challenge that began in April, run by Dean Graziosi and Tony Robbins. A mutual friend of ours created an offshoot group, which we were both part of, and then connected between ourselves. Hannah and I had a number of conversations before I asked her to come on and be a guest for the Why Me with Vera-Lee podcast series. Hannah really wasn't sure that she fit the brief of overcoming adversity. And when I discussed with her that I knew she was displaced in Thailand because of COVID, I had a feeling that there was more going on even than Hannah was really paying attention to at the time. And so I encouraged her fairly strongly to come on the podcast anyway, and let's just see how it goes. Well, we're both so glad that she did. Throughout the conversation, there was actually a number of events that had happened that really were very, very difficult for her and her family. And I feel that sharing her episode today, many of you will relate to the adversities that she was going through at that time.
Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments where life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage. Today's guest is Hannah Northcote. She has been affected by COVID, as so many people have, with a forced extended stay in Thailand, to which Hannah then started exploring options for building community. Hannah and I share this entrepreneurial journey together as fellow creative person. She is a drama teacher and the founder of Well Women. I've asked Hannah to join me to talk a little bit about who she is and what she does to help women, and what led her to start that community. So welcome to the Why Me podcast, Hannah.
Hi, Vera, and to everybody who's listening. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the lovely introduction.
So I also wanted to know, if you had to choose one book that's impacted your life, which would it be?
I think along my journey, there are definitely several books that would be in my what has impacted you bookshelf. But because you're an artist and a lot of your listeners could connect to that creative or artistic spirit, two books that influenced me in my young journey as an actor or as a theater artist was Artist's Way by Julia Cameron.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I was in New York City in my early 20s, I wanted to, I didn't know yet who I was or my voice as an artist. And so I did her practice morning pages.
Yes.
Yeah, where you write down just 3 pages of freehand stream of consciousness, and then you don't read it, you just write it. And it just helps you really brain dump everything on the page when you get up in the morning. And Vera, I did that for years. It was my morning practice for years. And then there was another book, and this one was Madeleine L'Engle. And she has a book, Walking on Water, Reflection on Art and Faith.
Wow.
because I'm a person of faith, and I was curious about how does faith and art go together. And so there were so many insights that she wrote that gave me clarity. And also, another one, Letters to a Young Poet
Okay.
by Rilke. And there was a part there where the writer messaged him, like, how do I know I'm a writer? And he said something to the lines of, if you go into the depths of the soul and you ask yourself, must I write?
Right.
Then you are. So I think those 3 books have influenced my journey as a young artist. And it's something that I still sometimes revisit until today.
Yeah, how profound. And what a fantastic way to be influenced by such fantastic books growing up. That's something that not everyone gets to experience.
Yeah, it's reading. I'm a reader, and I feel that there's just so much wisdom that people have who have gone before us, and I love reading the depth of their insight, because I sort of am the kind of person who likes to talk about those kind of things.
Yeah, all that good, deep and meaningful stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly get to more of that shortly. I had one more question for you. I'd like to know if you can think back to this morning, what was the first question that you asked yourself?
So I practice a morning routine. And the first question I ask myself is, what am I going to do for meditation today?
Fantastic.
And so I decided to practice some yoga, which is a form of movement meditation. And I feel that it was a really good way to start my morning.
Oh, I love it. And you know what else I love about it, Hannah? With meditation, my experience is that people have all different versions of what they call meditation. And a lot of people have this belief that meditation has to be sitting still. And it's just not the case, is it?
This is Ariella. She's my daughter.
Hello, Ariella. Oh, she probably can't hear me.
Okay, mommy has an interview, okay?
Yes, so a lot of people have this misconception that meditation has to be sitting still and doing nothing else, and it's just not the case. So
No.
what is your take on that?
I think that there are different pathways for people to practice meditation. For example, there is breathing meditation, where the idea is the focus will be on your breath. So I think that's the easiest way for people to access a meditation practice, because they can do it for as short as 2 minutes of just closing your eyes and focusing on your inhalations and your exhalations and putting your full awareness into that moment. The second one is a body scan. So one person can be lying down and just trying to feel, being authentic on how the different parts of your body feel, and you sort of try to trace your whole body from your forehead to the toes of your feet. Then there's centered prayer, where people can get ancient scripture or a text to meditate, to ruminate, and to ponder on, and you sort of get that text and, inspired by it, think of those words and what that might mean to you. Then there's movement meditation, and I feel like running is a movement meditation for a lot of runners. They get into a rhythm, a connection to their breath and a connection to their movement. Yoga is a form of movement meditation. And then Tony Robbins has that priming practice that includes movement and breath.
Yes.
And then there's also mindfulness, where the idea is being present and feeling in your body a certain emotion and how that manifests physically. Because meditation, the idea of meditation is focusing on one thing.
Yes, it's fantastic.
Yeah, connecting to the present moment. And I feel like there's so many different pathways for people to access that. depending on what will work for them. So I don't think meditation is a one-size-fits-all practice. I actually think that as human beings, as complex as we are, there will be a path for a person to access meditation as long as they seek for what would work for them. And sometimes it's trial and error. You try one thing and it doesn't work for you, so you just have to try another thing.
Yeah.
And there's also a variety of apps like Calm and Headspace that could assist a person in their meditation. So you can just play that app and listen to it and allow the voice or the guidance to lead you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that you've spoken about so many different types of meditation. And this is something that I often talk to my clients about, is that there are all different ways that you can meditate. And I, as a very visually creative person, I meditate all the time creating artwork where I'm actually not focusing on the result. I'm simply focusing on immersing myself in color or just being in that moment, as you said. And then I've got the other sorts of meditation where there's a lot more movement. And as an elite sports person, I totally get being in that zone as being a form of meditation. And if you can get to that point, it can be, like you said, long distance running, yoga. There's all sorts of different activities where you can be in that state. And I know for a lot of people that I've spoken to, meditation can seem scary because they're not used to being present with themselves in that moment. And that's one of the things that I certainly find, like I've produced a visualization series to try and help guide people through that process, because if you're not used to it, it does take a little bit of getting used to and a little bit of practice, and so that you can, go into those 2 minutes of breathing once you're used to it and really get so much benefit from it.
Yes. And I think I agree with you in terms of the challenges that people face in sitting with themselves and sitting with their thoughts. And some of the women during this time of quarantine, I live in Beijing, and I'm connected to a lot of women who had to stay in Beijing or chose to stay in Beijing. So they have been isolated for a long period of time. And just that people have said sometimes the silence scares them.
Right.
And I remember my mom telling me, like, she used to be one of those people, or she always had to have the television running because there always needs to be sort of like an outside noise. And just learning how to sit with your thoughts and know that those thoughts are invitations and that you have a choice whether to act on them, or you could just acknowledge that these are the thoughts that's passing through your mind, and then focus your mind out of the thought to the present, to the breath. So it definitely is a practice. I feel that maybe isn't as comfortable to some than to others, but through practice can be developed. And yeah, my husband is an art teacher.
Is he? Now, I didn't know that.
So he definitely taps into making art. He likes, his favorite current art right now is street art.
Wow.
And outside his classroom, he has a graffiti wall.
Awesome.
So he does a lot of stencil, graffiti, and different kinds of modern art.
Fantastic. That would be very freeing for him, I would think. Yeah.
He actually misses it. He misses his wall.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for discussing that. That's really interesting. And we might just move into now having you tell me a little bit about your story. So what led you to your recent pivot in your home life and your career?
So I teach in one of the international schools in Beijing, China. And when COVID hit in February, it was the first time we actually haven't traveled during the Chinese New Year.
Right.
And at that time, I think when a big, challenge is dumped on you, your brain is hijacked. And the first question I ask is, should we stay or should we go?
Right. Huge.
Because, right, that's the first question, fight or flight. Should I stay or should we go?
Yeah.
And there were some circumstances that forced us to stay. So one is that my daughters, I have 2 daughters, their passports were expiring. So we had to renew them, and it takes about a month to renew a passport. The challenge was, as we stayed, most of our colleagues started to leave because school didn't actually know how long this would last. And when that's all started, nobody knew a lot about the virus. Nobody knew the extent by which it would go or the time frame that it will extend to.
Yeah.
So we were in Beijing, and I'm a co-founder of WhyMe.
Yeah.
And because we thought it was a temporary thing, we hosted a lot of challenges. I hosted a 21-day fitness challenge. I hosted a style home challenge. We had a decluttering challenge, clean up your home during quarantine. We had Funuary for parents. How do you make this fun? But then it was after a month and it wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
Because the idea is you do a challenge, after the challenge, this virus will be over. We can all go back to our normal life. And then at the end of February, there was a moment when I went downstairs early in the morning, and my husband just turned to me and had tears in his eyes and said, "My dad's not doing good." And I'm like, how bad is it? It says, my sister flew from Ottawa to Woodstock because dad's brought to the hospital. And he said, "Okay, I gotta go." I'm like, "Yeah, you have to go." And so the next day he flew to Canada, and he was able to spend a couple of hours with dad before dad passed away.
Oh.
So this was later in February, and by the grace of God, during that time, travel wasn't restricted yet.
Yes.
And Steve, even though flew from Beijing, was able to go to Woodstock and be with his family, celebrate his dad's life, and then come back to Beijing with us. Now, when he came back to Beijing, things were getting, at the end of February, things were getting even tighter. And there was a police who came to our house. After he came back, he asked, and he only spoke Chinese, so our Ai, who is our nanny, who only speaks Chinese, was talking to the police, and we had no idea what they were talking about, so we were just nodding, as you would.
Right.
And then after the police left, we asked my daughter, who speaks Chinese, and I was like, so what did Ai and the police, what were they talking about? They're like, the police asked Ai if there was somebody in this house who left the country, and she said no. I'm like, what? She lied to the police. She shouldn't lie to the police.
No.
No. But what we realized is they're gonna find out he left. And we realized if we don't leave tomorrow, he'll have to do the 2-week home quarantine.
Yeah.
Which at that time sounded ridiculous, but it's
Right.
nothing compared to what we need to do now. And so we thought, okay, why don't we just go to Thailand so we can take a break from all of this, get the kids out of the house so they have more space. We had a lot of colleagues who are already in Thailand, so we wouldn't be by ourselves. And so we booked a flight and went to Thailand. This is early March.
Right. Not thinking that you were going to be
here
so
for
long.
6 months. And then March was a turning point because it was when first we heard that China then changed the quarantine rules.
Yes.
That if you were going to go back to Beijing, you couldn't land in Beijing. You had to be diverted to a city outside of Beijing and do a 2-week quarantine in a Chinese facility. Now, at that time, it sounded like really strange because it was the first time anybody mentioned anything about that. Whereas now, we're like, bring it on so we can go home. And then China just suspended all foreign visas.
Yes.
And then closed the borders. And then my grandfather passed away.
Oh.
So I'm the eldest in my dad's family. I'm the eldest grandchild in my dad's family, and my dad is the eldest of 8 kids. And my grandpa was brought to the hospital and he was tested for COVID. He didn't have COVID. But when he passed away, my dad wanted to go to the province where my grandpa would have his funeral, but Manila was in lockdown.
Okay.
And so his siblings had a talk with him. And the Filipino family relationship is very respectful, especially like in terms of if you're the eldest child, they have hold a lot of respect for kuya, because that's what we call older brother. Kuya, I said, Kuya, can you please not come? Because there's no virus in this part of the Philippines. And if you come and you're from Manila, which is the highest numbers, and suddenly there's a case in our town, everybody's going to blame our family.
Make that assumption.
And so it was really very hard for my dad, but he respected them. And so I think what people have started to do during this time is use technology. So my uncles and my cousins hosted a Facebook Live, because Facebook is a very popular multimedia platform in the Philippines for the funeral. And I couldn't go to because I was in Thailand. And that's how we celebrated my grandfather's, my lola's life. So we've been in Thailand for going into 7 months now. And we still have no idea when we will be able to go back home. But one of the blessings that we've received is that Thailand has given all foreigners in the country an automatic visa amnesty.
Right.
And they've extended it until September 26th. So we hope that we would be able to go by then. But it's funny because the first time when we were talking about it, my husband is like, I were talking things like, well, worst case scenario in June, July, that's when we get back to Beijing. Well, it's August now. School is about to start.
A little bit past the worst case scenario. It's certainly changed, hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think my adversity, my challenge might sound unique to some, but it's actually a very currently in the international world of people working overseas, a shared experience to a lot of people who have found themselves displaced because of the virus.
Absolutely. And that's a very good point. And so that brings up a couple of things that I relate to in that respect. Some of the boys I know from work have been over in Western Australia, and the border control there was a lot more stringent at the start than some of our other states. So it's been 6 months and still going, and one of our boys' wife is still living over in Victoria with the family. And, she can't get over there. And so the other point that this discussion raises for me is that adversity is difficult for all of us, no matter what it is, and all adversity is valid. And some people go into the thinking that, oh, well, I've had much worse than that, or, well, my situation, and it's like, no, because everything that we have to deal with that's a challenge is a challenge. It's requiring a different way to look at things, a different perspective, gosh, how are we going to get through this? And certainly adversity, I think, although there's a scale of it, it's actually not about levels of adversity. It's about how we handle that, and through it, what we learn about ourselves.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you so much for sharing that, because if you look at my situation, one could easily think, well, at least you're in Thailand, right?
Yeah.
You can go to the beach, you can, it's a good waiting place, which is true. There's a lot of things to be thankful for. But as you mentioned, there's also challenges along the way.
Yeah.
Like practical challenges. We're paying for rent in Beijing, and now we had to pay for unexpected rent of having to live here.
Yes.
On a financial level, there's a lot of things that you didn't budget for or didn't expect that now you have to roll with.
Yeah.
Sitting with the uncertainty, there's a lot of uncertainty, and trust And also there were times where we are thankful that we are working for a good school that is taking care of its faculty. But we also have stories from other teachers who were let go.
Right.
And suddenly they can't go back home and they actually lost their jobs and they have to pack that house and have it shipped where when they don't know where they're going to move to. So, but I do know that, as you said, in terms of adversity, it might not seem much to some. I think there's some people who are definitely hurt and are suffering through these challenges. And I thank you for just recognizing that, yeah, it might different forms of suffering or adversity or challenges, and it's valid for all as people experience them differently. And it's how do you face the adversity that was given to you?
Yeah, that's right. And you touched then too on trust. And trust is a word that I use a lot, but in different contexts, because in a situation like we're in at the moment, worldwide, I mean, as we know, this is an unprecedented occurrence, that everybody in the world right now is essentially going through this uncertainty. And with uncertainty, there's fear. And with fear, that's where we fall back on trust. But whose trust are we falling back on? Is it the trust of the people in our inner circle? Is it being able to trust ourselves that we know we can get through this? Is it trust in other people? So what's your view on how trust has played a role in this situation for you?
For me, my faith has been the anchor that has given me something to hold on to. I believe in a higher power, and different people where they're coming from would call that higher power differently, to the universe, a higher consciousness. And coming from the Christian faith, I recognize it as God.
Yep.
And I feel that during this time, I had to hold on to that faith that I might not understand what is happening, but I truly trust that God will provide for us, is with us, and will be with us to get through this.
Yeah.
And having that trust that I don't have to bear the burden of all of this in my shoulders, because there's somebody watching out for me, for others, for the world, even though we're in VUCA times. I just heard that term, VUCA, and it means volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous.
Right. That's a great term.
Yeah, to describe this time, I have felt peace. Of course, I felt stressed. Everybody, I feel, have experienced some sort of level of stress during this time. But I'm constantly meditating on Psalm 91. And one of the first verses, and those who dwell in the house of the Almighty will hide in his shelter under his wings.
Yes.
And I feel like that's what I have been doing, because if I just think of the situation as something that I myself will just have to go through, overcome, sometimes I feel I'm the bottom of myself. And I need to cling into something bigger, stronger than who I am. And I feel for me that has been faith, that has been God. He has been my source of strength, my source of refuge, and the safe space that I can come into during these challenging times.
Thank you so much for sharing that. There's another question I wanted to ask you, and it is related to the fact that you are where you are. It's been 7 months now. You've had 2 deaths in your families. How are you getting through that side of it? Because that's got to be tough.
Yeah. I think for any person working overseas, one of the biggest challenges we face is not being able to be with your loved ones during times of tragedy and during times of grief. I'm close to my in-laws, and our summer plan was that we were going to go back to Canada. So we can help my mom-in-law, and Steve was really excited to be with his mom, to clean the house, help her transition, help her move forward from a life of not having dad there, and couldn't do that anymore. And also not even being there for a funeral, which is like a life-changing family ritual that human beings have been practicing over time.
Yes.
And I feel that grief, I forgot who wrote it, it's like a wave, right? Hits you, knocks you down, and then you just have to come back up and breathe again. And I feel like I felt that. And my husband definitely, it's so strange for him to have this different kind of grieving period in a very, very strange time, feeling how it feels like. But I think that I needed to shift my focus. I needed to change my focus to shift me away from these emotions and get into a better state. And I think that's where I met you. That's where the Start Over Challenge comes from. The Tony Robbins Challenge come from. And one of the things that I felt has been really key is when Tony Robbins talked about focus. And he said, because what we focus on grows. And now there's like science behind that in terms of neuroplasticity in the mind. That thoughts are real. They take up mental real estate in our brain, and they manifest as tree-like structures called dendrites. And when you think of a thought, there's a little tree grows in your brain, and you're growing this beautiful lush forest in your head of thoughts, or you're growing a dark forest that could lead to inflammation, disease, and illness. So I listened to a lot of Dr. Caroline Leaf's teaching about how thoughts manifest in our mind and in our body and affects us. When Tony spoke about, there's 3 key decisions in your focus. First is, what are you focusing on? What are you missing? Or what do you want? What do you need? And then the second one is, are you focused on what you can't control or what you can control? And the third is, are you focused on the past, present, or the future? And so I think that is such a great thinking tool. So do I focus on what I missed, or do I focus on what I need? And I learned what I need is deep, meaningful connections. And that's why we're plugged into Well Women, even though it's through the digital space, because we needed to connect to community. We connected with friends here in Thailand who we just met here in Hua because we're all displaced teachers in Thailand. And so I needed community. That's what I'm going to focus on. I can't be with my family right now. It sucks, but I can't dwell on that. How can I connect, make meaningful relationships? And the second one, what can I control? What can I control? I cannot control China. I don't think anybody can control China.
No.
Lots of introspective insight, and this will continue throughout the rest of the episode with Hannah. I wanted to pause for a moment to recognize the importance of not comparing your adversity to other people's adversity, even to different parts of your own adversity journeys. Comparison is going to get you nowhere. The important thing is to honour the difficulty at the time and to put in place strategies and ways to manage how to get through, including reaching out to people who are there to support you emotionally, sometimes financially, physically, in any way that they can. Remember that you are not alone. Although your individual circumstances are yours, there is always going to be someone out there who can relate in some way to what you're going through.
It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person, This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests, and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision. On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story.
Cannot control border restrictions, visas, cannot. But what can I control? Oh, I can create a mastermind. I didn't even know what a mastermind was before I joined SOC. And I'm like, oh, if I create a mastermind, I'll be able to actually help inspire, educate, encourage women to move forward in their lives.
Yeah.
I can control that.
Yeah.
And then number 3, should I focus on the past? Like, was it the best decision to come here? It's debatable, but we've made that decision.
Yeah.
I just have to make the most of that decision that we made and the present. But also, I want to learn new skills, new capabilities in case the world changes.
Which
so that I have what I need to pivot in the future.
Yeah.
So I think joining the Start Over Challenge where I met you, Tony Robbins Challenge, and then joining KBB has given me a new focus, met a entirely new community, connected with people who are believing bigger, have big hearts, and creating things that are impacting their community. And hopefully that will send a big ripple effect in the world, just like what you're doing.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I love the way that you talk about that, what you focus on is what you feel. And certainly that is something that I teach people as well. And this is why I wanted you on here, because our methods are a little bit different of delivery, but we're on exactly the same page. We're empowering people, and we understand from our own personal experiences and the fact that we put these things into practice. That I love your analogy, of planting the beautiful, flourishing forest compared to the other side. And that is something that I know very well about perspective as well. And you do have a choice, as you said. And sometimes it might not feel like we have a choice. But when you do focus on what you can control, and then you focus on the fact that those thoughts that you're thinking, you are creating, and therefore you can control them as well. So if you have something coming in there that's filling up, the stuff that you don't want to be growing in there, then recognize it, replace it, let it go, and replace it with the stuff you do want in there.
Yes, Dr. Caroline Leaf, who talks a lot about neuroplasticity, said that whatever you have wired in, you can wire out.
Exactly. And that is
And
something, yeah, that is something that a lot of people, and I work with a lot of people who've gone through trauma because that's been a lot of my experience. A lot of people think that once they've created that track, it can't be changed, that it's there forever. And it's so not the case. And I am living proof of it. Pretty much everybody that I like to surround myself with, I actually make a conscious effort to look at people coming into my life to say,
mm,
are they going to lift me up? And
mhm.
can they look at things from a different perspective? Or do they fall into that pit and well and have the woe is me? Nothing's ever going to get better. I'm never going to change what happened in the past. And the
Yeah.
reason I asked you about that question about losing two family members, being separated, is because a lot of people would have focused on that and fallen into quite a state of despair. And I love the way that you explained how you avoided that taking grip. And of course, that grief is going to come through. And grief is an
Mhm.
emotion that we will all feel. It's a stage that we will all go through in that
Mhm.
situation, but it doesn't have to pull our life down along with it. So I just love the
Yeah.
way that you spoke about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And also during that time, during the darkest March, I would call that like sort of the darkest. And I
Yeah.
called Rebecca, who is my co-founder for Well Women, and we were literally both crying on the phone. And so we just encouraged each other. We've been working on this morning practice called Magical Morning. And we said, okay, why don't we just practice Magical Morning for the next 40 days,
Yeah.
keep each other accountable,
Yeah.
and then let's see where it takes us. What if
Love
we
it.
just so much research going on the power of having a morning routine from the 5 a.m. club to Hal Era's Miracle Morning. And we took a lot of inspiration for that and then created a practice that's uniquely crafted for women. And we practiced it. And that became my tool to get out of that funk, the grief.
Yeah.
And then when I finished a 40-day challenge, day one, start over challenge, a 40-day practice, the start over challenge. And at that time I was ready. I'm like, okay, this is where God brought me. I'm just going to do this.
Yeah.
And then Tony talks about focus. And he said, because people who focus on what they're missing, what they can't control in the past creates a victim mentality.
Yes.
And that's exactly, I think, what you were describing.
Yes. Yes, it is.
And when people find themselves stuck in that situation, because that is the mindset that they have about life.
Yeah. And it's so wonderful to hear how you've pivoted and the fact that you've spoken about an accountability partner. It's one of the most important things that I've learned in my recent journey, because I've always been one of these people that's been accountable for myself. And I'm a very highly driven person.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I am. I'm very motivated because I've spent my life doing, and I've spent my life essentially being forced by my own challenges and difficulties to have to think outside the box all the time, to always have to look at a different perspective, to be stuck in a hospital bed where I couldn't move a single thing in my body except my eyelids, and yet be able to come up with the concepts, which is now the WhyMe Movement. So, I've been the sort of person that's kept myself accountable when really there was nobody else there to do it. But the thing is, what I've learned through this experience is having other people help me in that accountability. Gee, it's such a relief for me to be able to not only check in with someone else and how they're going on the same journey, that one thing that you're sharing together, but also to be able to have that person that is just keeping an eye on me. So on the occasional day where I go, you know what, I'm just a bit too tired for that one today, then it'll be, hey, Vera, how'd you go with that task today? You know what, I know that phone call's coming, so I'll do it anyway.
Yes. Yes. And that is, I feel, the power of community.
Yes.
And that's what Well Women is about. So we have different Well Women platform to give an opportunity to establish an accountability for women so they feel heard, supported, secure. Because let's say we have one group and it's a fitness group, right? When you see all of these people posting their workouts it sort of encourages you to do your own.
That's right.
And especially when somebody's like, oh yeah, Vera, where's your workout today? Or like, okay, I'm going to go do it right now.
That's right. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And Marie Forleo wrote in her book, Everything is Figureoutable,
Yes.
that being a part of an accountability community, she quoted American, I think, Training Society increases your chance for success for 65%.
Yes, and something like that's huge.
Yeah, having one accountability partner or an accountability appointment increases your chances 95%.
Yep, it's huge.
Right? It's huge. And so I think like for big goals in our life, whether it's a goal in fitness, in our relationship, or in business or creativity, it's nice to be accountable.
Yeah.
Because I think when you say something and you go in the direction of your goals and dreams and people know about it, you sort of want to do it because you want to live up to your word.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that aspect of it. And that's the thing. I mean, and we've spoken about quite a few things tonight, and I really appreciate you being so transparent and authentic, as you always are. And trust is one of those things that we've discussed. And you need an accountability partner that you can trust as well, because I know that I started a challenge in February and I went through 2 accountability partners before I got my current accountability partner, who I've been with through that challenge for the last, I don't know, it must be 5 months. So it's an interesting process, even just finding the right accountability partner, and that's where communities like what we're both creating with our different things that we're doing, but in the same concept and the same goal and purpose, where people can come in and they have a community to be able to find someone who's sharing that journey with them, but also to have options to find the right person for you, because we all have different personalities and we all have different time zones, actually. So sometimes that can be, one of the important aspects too. Yeah.
I remember years ago, maybe a couple of decades ago, I was in London and I was in a double-decker bus. And during this double-decker bus, I just really loved sitting on the front. Sometimes I would just sit on that bus so I could sit on the front and look at the city.
Yeah.
So it's like you're hop on, hop off bus, but you don't have to pay the tourist rates. You can just sit on the bus and look at the city. And I thought this thought, because it's so, if a tree falls in the forest and doesn't make a sound, did anybody know about it?
That's right.
And it's like that accountability, right? If you fall, but then nobody's watching over you, did it matter? Or you're not serving a community, did it matter? But what if suddenly all of the trees around you see that you fall and actually picks you up and puts you back up again?
Yeah.
And then you're not just a sole tree in the middle of nowhere. You're actually part of that ecosystem.
Yeah. And
you're all of these trees connected and living together. And your life supports theirs as their life supports you. And I think human beings are created for community.
Absolutely. And I love, again, you've got fantastic analogies, and I love that analogy. And the way I heard it was that once the tree fell over, it took the other trees to pick it back up and put it there for it to recognize that community. And a lot of the time when we're in that perspective, that state, we don't realize there are people there ready to be around us, to support us, to love us, and to be that community. And sometimes that's that initial step, that fear of, oh, I've just fallen, what am I going to do? And it's taking that step, having that trust to reach out. And that's where you find your community a lot of the time. Love it.
Yeah.
So we'll have to wrap it up there, Hannah, but I'd really like you just to have the opportunity to tell people where to go to be part of your community, and I'll leave the rest to you. You can let us know your websites, etc. That'd be great.
Thank you, Vera. So Well Women is currently exists in the platform, WeChat platform, but we are expanding online. So we have a website, wellwomen.me. And if you want to learn more about me, you can visit my website, which is www.dramayogi.com. And I'm also in Instagram as Drama Yogi.
Yes, I'm friends with you on Insta.
I know. And I'm also, just like you, we've already created our community in Beijing, but I'm learning how to expand that beyond Beijing to the world and taking steps to get there. Thank you, Vera, for this opportunity to interview with you and to share to your community and to talk about tough things, but it's these things that make us better.
It absolutely is. Thank you so much for being here, Hannah.
My pleasure.
You go keep building that community.
Thank you.
Well, another story, more WhyMe moments and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the ICE acronym, I for Inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for two things, actually. Connection. You are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own. And yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.